My son weaponized nature to destroy my home and try to end my life, all because he could not wait for his inheritance. When a massive redwood tree crushed my house while I sat on the porch, everyone called it a freak accident. But when I found the pile of sweet potatoes and scent attractant at the base of the stump, I knew this was attempted murder. Please subscribe to the channel if you enjoy stories about justice and standing up for the truth. It really helps us grow. And tell me in the comments, do you think I should go to the police immediately, or should I play along to trap him in his own lie? My name is Arthur, and for the last 40 years, my life has revolved around a quiet plot of land on the edge of Lake Harrow. It is not a massive estate, and the house is not a mansion by modern standards, but it is every inch a home. It was the place where my late wife Martha and I raised our 2 children. It was the place where I nursed her through her final illness 3 years ago, and it is the place where I intended to spend whatever time I have left on this earth. The house sits tucked away in a dense embrace of forestry, with the lake lapping gently just 50 yards from the back porch. The crown jewel of the property, however, was not the house itself, but the tree we called the General. The General was a coastal redwood, an absolute titan of a tree that had stood on that land long before I was born, and, I assumed, would stand long after I was gone. It towered over the roof, its massive branches providing shade that kept the house cool even in the deepest heat of July. I loved that tree. I used to pat its bark like the flank of a horse whenever I walked past it. That Tuesday started like any other Tuesday in my retirement. I woke up at 5 in the morning, a habit from my years working at the mill that I never quite managed to shake. The house was silent, filled with the comfortable, dusty stillness of a life well lived. I shuffled into the kitchen, the floorboards creaking in familiar places, and started the coffee pot. I remember looking out the kitchen window as the water dripped through the filter. The sun was just beginning to crest over the tree line, painting the mist on the lake in shades of violet and soft gold. It was breathtaking. Even after 4 decades, the view never got old. I poured my coffee into my favorite ceramic mug, the heavy blue one with the chip on the rim that Martha had given me for our 10th anniversary, and I stepped out onto the back porch. The air was crisp, smelling of pine needles and damp earth. I sat in my rocking chair, took a sip of the hot coffee, and let out a long sigh of contentment. I remember thinking about how lucky I was. I owned my home outright. I had my health mostly. I had the lake. I watched a heron glide silently over the water, looking for its breakfast. It was the definition of peace. I took another sip, and then I heard it. It started as a groan, a low, vibrating sound that seemed to come from deep within the earth itself. I frowned, lowering my mug. I thought perhaps it was a truck on the main road, miles away, or maybe a localized tremor. But then the groan turned into a sharp, sickening pop like a gunshot, followed by a tearing sound that made the hair on my arms stand up. It sounded like the screaming of wood fibers being ripped apart. I looked up. Above me, the sky seemed to tilt. The massive canopy of the General, which had always been a fixed point in my universe, was moving. It was leaning toward the house. For a split second, my brain refused to process the physics of what was happening. Trees like that do not just fall. They are rooted in history. But gravity does not care about history. The lean accelerated. The screaming of the wood became a roar. Instinct took over. I threw my coffee cup and dove off the side of the porch, scrambling into the wet grass and rolling as hard as I could toward the open lawn. The sound of the impact was not a crash. It was an explosion. The ground jumped 3 inches into the air, slamming against my chest. I covered my head with my arms as debris rained down around me. Shingles, splinters the size of spears, dust, and leaves showered the lawn. The noise was so loud it was deafening, a thunderclap that rattled my teeth. And then, just as quickly as it had started, silence rushed back in. I lay there in the grass for a long moment, gasping for air, waiting for the rest of the house to collapse. When nothing else fell, I slowly pushed myself up to my knees. My ears were ringing. I turned to look at my home. The devastation was absolute. The trunk of the General, 5 feet thick, had sliced through the roof of the house like a knife through a cardboard box. The master bedroom, the living room, the kitchen where I had just stood, they were gone, crushed under tons of timber. If I had stayed inside to pour a second cup, I would have been a stain on the floorboards. If I had not dove off the porch, the shockwave and flying debris might have killed me. I stood up, my knees shaking violently. I stared at the wreckage of 40 years of memories. I could see the shattered remains of the china cabinet. I could see the twisted metal of the refrigerator. My heart felt like it was going to beat right out of my chest. I walked closer, stepping over shattered glass and pieces of my own roof. I needed to understand. How? How could a healthy redwood just snap? There had been no storm, no wind, no lightning. I made my way around the side of the ruin to the base of the tree. The root ball had not pulled up. The tree had snapped at the base, about 2 feet off the ground. That in itself was incredibly rare for a redwood unless it was rotten, but the General had been inspected by an arborist just last year. It was healthy. I approached the stump, wiping dust from my eyes. The jagged spikes of wood stuck up like broken teeth. I leaned in closer, squinting through the settling dust. The wood at the breakpoint was light in color, fresh and strong. It wasn't rotten. But as I looked at the side of the trunk facing the lake, the side that had given way first, I saw the marks. They were distinctive. Parallel grooves, chiseled and chaotic. Teeth marks. Beaver teeth. I stared at them, bewildered. We had beavers in the lake, certainly. They were a nuisance sometimes, taking down saplings or clogging the overflow drain. But a beaver taking down a redwood? A tree of this circumference? It was unheard of. They preferred softwoods, aspens, willows. They didn't gnaw on ancient redwoods unless they were desperate. I moved closer to the base, stepping into the brush that grew thick around the trunk. That was when I smelled it. Beneath the scent of fresh pine sap and pulverized drywall, there was something sweet, sickly sweet. I used the toe of my boot to push aside a fern that had been flattened by the falling trunk. There, scattered in the dirt right where the beavers had done the most damage, were chunks of orange vegetable matter, sweet potatoes, and apples, dozens of them chopped into chunks. And something else. A dark, oily residue had been poured over the bark at the base of the cut. I knelt down and touched the oily spot with my finger, bringing it near my nose. It smelled like poplar extract and something artificial. Bait. My blood ran cold. This wasn't nature. This was agriculture. Someone had deliberately baited this specific tree. Someone had been coming here, night after night, placing sweet potatoes and attractant right at the stress point of the tree, training the beavers to gnaw here, focusing their attention on the one tree that, if it fell, would destroy my house. I stood up, a wave of nausea washing over me that had nothing to do with the crash. Who would do this? Who hated me enough to bring a house down on my head? And then my phone buzzed in my pocket. I jumped, pulling it out with trembling hands. The screen was cracked, but it still worked. David, the screen read. My son. I stared at the name. David lived 2 towns over, about 40 minutes away. We had not spoken in 2 weeks, not since the argument about the trust fund. I pressed answer and held the phone to my ear. Dad? David's voice came through, sounding tight. Dad, are you there? I'm here, I rasped, my voice sounding foreign to my own ears. Oh, thank God, he said. I just had a feeling. Is everything okay? I had a weird feeling something was wrong at the house. A feeling. He had a feeling. The tree fell, David, I said, watching the steam rise from the crushed remains of my kitchen. The General. It fell on the house. There was a pause. It was just a second too long. What? Oh my God! Are you hurt? Did it? Is the house gone? I'm alive, I said. The house is destroyed. I'm coming, he said immediately. I'm already in the car. I'm 5 minutes away. Sit tight, Dad. Don't touch anything. The line went dead. I lowered the phone slowly. He was 5 minutes away. He lived 40 minutes away. He had called me the moment the tree fell, claiming he had a feeling, and he was already almost here. I looked down at the sweet potatoes and the beaver chew marks. The pieces of the puzzle slammed together in my mind with the force of the falling tree. David had been desperate for money. His business was failing. I knew that, even though he tried to hide it. He had been begging me to sell the lake property, to move into a condo, to liquidate the assets so he could manage the money for me. I had refused. I told him this land was my legacy, and I wasn't leaving until I died. Until I died. The realization hit me harder than the shockwave. My son, my own flesh and blood, had not just waited for nature to take its course. He had engineered a catastrophe. He knew I sat on the porch every morning. He knew the layout of the house. He knew that if the tree fell this way, it would crush the kitchen and the porch. He hadn't just destroyed my home. He had tried to kill me. I heard the crunch of gravel on the driveway. He was here. He was fast, too fast. I looked at the evidence at my feet, the bait, the oil. If David saw this, he would know that I knew. He would try to hide it, or worse. I needed to think. I was an old man, shaken and bruised, standing in the ruins of my life. He was younger, stronger, and desperate. I couldn't confront him. Not yet. I had to become something I had never been before. I had to become a liar. I quickly kicked some loose dirt and fern leaves over the pile of sweet potatoes, hiding the bright orange chunks. I scuffed out the track I had made to the base of the tree. I wiped the oily residue from my finger onto my pants. I had to look like a victim, just a confused, lucky old man who survived a freak accident. The car door slammed. "Dad!" David's voice echoed through the trees. "Dad! Where are you?" I took a deep breath, forcing my shaking hands to still. I walked out from behind the stump, rounding the corner of the crushed house just as David came sprinting onto the lawn. He stopped dead when he saw the destruction. His eyes went wide. For a moment, I saw the calculation in his face. He was looking at the porch. He was looking for a body. "David!" I called out, making my voice sound weak and trembling. "I'm here, son. I'm here." He whipped his head toward me. His expression shifted instantly from cold assessment to practiced panic. "Dad! Oh, Jesus!" He ran to me, grabbing me by the shoulders. He looked me up and down, checking for blood. When I saw the roof, I thought you were inside." "I was on the lawn," I lied. "I was checking the garden hose. I heard a crack and ran." "Thank God," he breathed, pulling me into a hug. I felt his heart hammering against my chest. It wasn't the rhythm of relief, it was the rhythm of adrenaline. I was so worried. I woke up with this panic, you know? I just drove. I didn't even know why. "It's a miracle you're here," I said, pulling back and looking him in the eye. I searched for any sign of guilt, any flicker of remorse. There was nothing, just a gloss of sweat on his forehead and a tightness in his jaw. "The house is gone, David. Everything is gone." He looked over my shoulder at the wreckage. "The important thing is that you're safe," he said. Then his voice dropped, becoming somber. "We'll figure this out. The insurance, the land, we'll handle it. You can't stay here now, obviously. You'll have to come stay with us. We'll get this place cleared and, well, we can talk about selling the lot later, once the dust settles." He was already selling it. The dust hadn't literally settled, and he was already cashing the check. "I suppose you're right," I said, playing the defeated old man. "I don't have anywhere else to go." Exactly, David said. He put an arm around me, guiding me away from the house, away from the tree stump, away from the evidence. Let's get you in the car. I'll call the police and the insurance company for you. You don't need to worry about a thing. I'll take care of everything. I let him lead me to his car. I sat in the passenger seat of his expensive SUV, the leather smelling of new money and stale cigarettes. As he walked around to the driver's side, I looked back at the house one last time. I looked at the stump of the general. He thought he had won. He thought he had scared me off the land, or perhaps he was disappointed he hadn't killed me, but he was content with the consolation prize of the property value. He thought I was just a senile old man who had lost his home to bad luck. But he was wrong. I wasn't just a grandfather. I was a man who had worked 40 years in a sawmill. I knew wood, I knew nature, and I knew when something was rotten. I watched him get into the car, his face composed, pulling out his phone to make a call. He looked at me and smiled, a reassuring, predatory smile. "It's going to be okay, Dad," he said. "Yes," I answered, gripping my knee so hard my knuckles turned white. "It is." I was going to make him pay. I didn't know how yet, but as we drove away from the shattered remains of my life, I made a vow. I would not sell this land, and I would expose him for exactly what he was. The drive to David's house was a blur of feigned concern on his part and silence on mine. My mind was racing, replaying every interaction we had over the last year. The requests for loans, the anger when I refused to co-sign a new mortgage for him, the subtle comments about how lonely it must be for me out at the lake, how dangerous it was for an old man to be so far from a hospital. It had all been leading to this. He had been setting the stage for my accidental death or forced relocation for months. When we arrived at his house, his wife Brenda was waiting at the door. She looked genuinely shocked to see me covered in dust and debris, but when her eyes met David's, there was a flicker of communication I couldn't quite decipher. Was she in on it, or was she just another pawn in his game? "Arthur!" she cried, ushering me inside. "David called and said there was an accident. Are you all right?" "I'm fine, Brenda," I said, "just shaken." "The house is a total loss," David announced, walking into the kitchen and pouring himself a glass of water. He didn't offer me one. "The big Redwood finally came down, crushed the whole place." "Oh no," Brenda said, her hand going to her mouth. "That beautiful house." "It's just things," David said quickly. "Dad is safe, that's what matters. He'll stay here for a while. We can set up the guest room downstairs." I sat at their kitchen island, feeling like an intruder. "I'll need to go back tomorrow," I said, "to meet the insurance adjuster, and I need to salvage what I can." David froze mid-sip. "I don't think that's a good idea, Dad. It's dangerous. The structure is unstable. I can meet the adjuster. You should rest." "I need to find my wife's jewelry box," I lied. The jewelry box was actually in a safety deposit box at the bank, but David didn't know that. It was in the master bedroom, if the looters come. "I'll go look for it," David insisted. "I don't want you climbing around in that mess." He was terrified I would see the stump. He wanted to control the site. He wanted to clear the evidence before anyone with a trained eye looked at it. "I appreciate that, David," I said softly, "but I need to see it myself, for closure." He hesitated, his jaw tightening. "Fine, but I'm going with you. I'm not letting you out of my sight." That night, lying in the unfamiliar guest bed, staring at the ceiling, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard the crack of the wood. I felt the ground jump. I saw the sweet potatoes. I needed a plan. If I went to the police now, what did I have? Some chewed vegetables and a suspicious son. The police would call it a civil matter, or a delusion of a traumatized senior citizen. I needed concrete proof. I needed to catch him in the act of covering it up, or I needed to find the paper trail. I remembered something. David had a home office. He was sloppy with his paperwork. He always had been. If he was in financial trouble deep enough to try to kill his father, there would be letters. Notices. maybe even a search history on his computer. I waited until the house was silent. The digital clock on the nightstand read 2:14 a.m. I threw off the covers and crept to the door. I opened it slowly, wincing as the hinges gave a soft squeak. The hallway was dark. I could hear David's heavy snoring from the master bedroom upstairs. I made my way to his office on the main floor. The door was unlocked. I slipped inside and closed it behind me, not daring to turn on the light. I used the flashlight on my cracked phone, keeping the beam low. His desk was a mess of papers. Unopened bills, overdue notices. I shuffled through them. Credit card debt. A second mortgage on his house that was in arrears. A letter from a loan shark or a very aggressive private lender threatening legal action if payment wasn't made by the first of the month. The motive was sitting right there in front of me. He was drowning. He needed the inheritance now. I turned to his computer. I tapped the space bar. It woke up, asking for a password. I tried his birthday. Nothing. I tried his kids' names. Nothing. I tried money. Nothing. I sat back, frustrated. Then I looked at the sticky note attached to the monitor. It had a list of phone numbers, and at the bottom, scribbled in small text, Weil E123. I typed it in. The screen unlocked. I didn't have much time. I opened his browser history. My heart pounded against my ribs. I scrolled back a week, then 2 weeks. And there it was. How to attract beavers to a specific tree. Beaver bait recipes. Structural integrity of redwood trees. Does homeowners insurance cover tree damage? Inheritance tax laws, state of Oregon. I felt sick. It was one thing to suspect it. It was another to see it typed out in black and white. He had researched how to murder me. I pulled out my phone and took photos of the screen. I took photos of the overdue bills on the desk. I had the motive, and I had the premeditation. Suddenly, I heard a floorboard creak in the hallway. I froze. The light from under the door shifted. Someone was standing there. I killed the flashlight on my phone and held my breath. The doorknob began to turn. Would you like me to continue with part 2? This is the end of the first segment. The door swung open. I didn't have time to close the browser window, so I just tapped the power button on the monitor. The screen went black just as the overhead light flicked on, flooding the room with a harsh, blinding glare. I spun around in the chair, clutching my chest, blinking rapidly. It was David. He was wearing his boxers and a t-shirt, his hair messy, his eyes wide and alert. He didn't look like a man who had just woken up. He looked like a man who had been lying awake, listening. "Dad?" he snapped, his voice sharp. "What the hell are you doing in here?" I let my mouth hang open slightly, trembling my lower lip. I held up my phone, my hand shaking. I couldn't find the number, David. The insurance number. I needed to know if they cover the debris removal. I can't sleep thinking about that tree sitting on my kitchen. David stepped into the room, his eyes darting from me to the black computer screen. He walked over to the desk, looming over me. I could smell the stale sweat of his anxiety. "You're on my computer?" he asked, his voice low. "I tried to find the internet," I stammered, leaning into the confused old man persona as hard as I could. "But I don't know the password. I was just looking for a phone book in the drawers." He stared at me for a long, agonizing second. I prayed he wouldn't wiggle the mouse. If the screen woke up and showed his search history for beaver bait, I wouldn't leave this house alive. I could see the calculation behind his eyes. He was weighing whether I was senile or a threat. Finally, his shoulders dropped. He let out a huff of annoyance. "Dad, it's 2 a.m. You don't need to worry about the insurance. I told you I'm handling it. You don't know how to work this stuff anyway." He reached past me and unplugged the computer tower from the wall. The fan whirred to a stop. "Go back to bed. We have a big day tomorrow. The adjuster is meeting us at the property at 9. "Okay," I whispered, pushing myself up from the chair using the desk for support. I'm sorry, David. I just feel so helpless. Yeah, well, he muttered, ushering me out of the room. Just let me do the thinking from now on. I went back to the guest room and lay in the dark, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I didn't sleep a wink. I clutched my phone to my chest, feeling the warmth of the device that held the photos of his guilt. He thought he was doing the thinking. He had no idea I was about to do the hunting. The drive back to the lake the next morning was tense. The sky was overcast, a steel-gray blanket that matched my mood. David drove fast, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. He had a chainsaw in the back of the SUV. He said it was to help clear a path for the adjuster, but I knew better. He was going to cut the stump. He was going to slice away the teeth marks and the bait residue, turning the evidence of attempted murder into a pile of sawdust. I had to stop him, or at least I had to get a physical sample before he did. When we pulled into the driveway, the devastation looked even worse in the flat morning light. My home, the place where I had taught David to fish, where I had held his hand when he scraped his knee, was a splintered wreck. The huge trunk of the general lay across the structure like a tombstone. David didn't waste a second. He put the car in park and jumped out. "Stay here, Dad," he commanded. "I'm going to make sure it's safe to walk around." He went straight to the back, grabbing the chainsaw. I waited until he rounded the corner of the house, then I moved. I didn't move like an old man. I moved like a man running for his life. I scrambled out of the car and ran toward the garden shed that had miraculously survived the impact. I needed a container, a jar, a bag, anything. I found a rusted coffee can full of old nails. I dumped the nails on the floor and shoved the can into my jacket pocket. I hurried toward the fallen tree. The sound of the chainsaw ripped through the air. A jagged, aggressive roar. I rounded the corner and saw him. David was standing over the stump. He hadn't started cutting yet. He was kicking the dirt, scattering the fern leaves I had placed over the sweet potatoes the day before. He was looking for the bait. He knew it was there. "David!" I yelled, waving my arms. He jumped, spinning around. The chainsaw idled in his hands, the blade twitching. "I told you to stay in the car!" he screamed over the engine noise. "I need to pee!" I shouted back, shuffling closer. "I can't hold it!" "Go in the woods!" he yelled, turning back to the stump. He revved the engine. The chain blurred. He was lowering the bar toward the section of the trunk where the beaver teeth marks were deepest. I couldn't let him cut it. "David, wait!" I screamed, clutching my chest and dropping to one knee. "My heart! David!" It was a gamble. If he truly wanted me dead, he might just let me die right there on the lawn. But I was betting on his cowardice. Killing me with a tree was one thing. Watching me have a heart attack while he held a chainsaw was another. It was too messy, too suspicious. The chainsaw noise died down as he killed the engine. He dropped the saw and ran to me. "Dad, Dad, breathe!" I gasped for air, clutching his shirt. "My pills!" I wheezed. "In the car! Glove box!" Okay, stay here," he panicked. He scrambled up and sprinted toward the driveway. The second he was out of sight, I dropped the act. I lunged for the stump. I pulled the coffee can from my pocket. I scooped up a handful of the dirt, the mashed sweet potatoes, and the wood chips soaked in that oily attractant. I shoved a piece of the bark with the beaver teeth marks into the can. It was messy, and my hands were shaking, but I got it. I jammed the can deep into the inside pocket of my heavy coat and zipped it up. Then I rubbed dirt on my knees and collapsed back onto the grass, just as David came running back with my bottle of blood pressure medication. He forced a pill into my mouth. "Swallow it," he demanded. "Jesus, Dad, you're trying to kill me with this stress." The irony was so thick I almost choked on the pill. I sat there for 10 minutes catching my breath while David paced nervously. He kept looking at the stump, then at me, then at the road. He was torn. He wanted to destroy the evidence, but he couldn't do it with me watching. And now he was afraid I'd drop dead before he secured the insurance payout. That was when the black sedan pulled into the driveway. The adjuster. Finally, David muttered. He helped me up. Don't say anything, Dad. Let me talk. You're confused. You're in shock. Just nod. The adjuster was a tall, thin man named Mr. Henderson. He carried a clipboard and wore a suit that was too nice for a demolition site. He shook David's hand firmly, then gave me a pitying nod. Terrible tragedy, Henderson said, looking at the house. A tree that size, acts of God are unpredictable. Exactly, David said, guiding him toward the house and away from the stump. It just snapped, no warning. We think it was wind shear from the storm last week that weakened it. Actually, I spoke up, my voice steady. David froze. His hand squeezed my shoulder hard. Dad is a little out of it, he said quickly to Henderson. I was sitting on the porch, I continued, ignoring David's grip. I heard a popping sound, like fibers tearing. Henderson made a note. Standard for structural failure in timber. Now regarding the policy, the beneficiary on the dwelling coverage. That's me, David interrupted. As the power of attorney. I blinked. Power of attorney? I had never signed a power of attorney. I have the paperwork in the car, David said, his voice tight. Dad signed it last month when his memory started slipping, to make things easier. My blood turned to ice. He hadn't just planned the murder. He had already stolen my identity. If I challenged him right now, right here, it would be his word against mine. The word of a senile old man versus a devoted son. Henderson looked like a man who just wanted to close the file and go to lunch. If I caused a scene, David would claim I was having an episode. He might even have me committed. That would be the end. I would lose everything. I needed to be smarter. I needed to let him think he had won, just for a few more hours. Yes, I said softly, looking at the ground. David takes care of everything. David relaxed visibly. He patted my shoulder. Why don't you go sit in the car, Dad? Mr. Henderson and I need to inspect the foundation. I walked back to the SUV, but I didn't get in. I walked around to the back of the house, keeping out of sight. I needed to see what they were doing. I watched from the edge of the woods. David led Henderson around the perimeter. He was talking fast, pointing at the roof, pointing at the crushed porch. He was doing everything he could to keep Henderson's back to the stump, but Henderson was thorough. He stepped away from David and walked toward the base of the tree. I need to photograph the break point, Henderson said. I saw David stiffen. He took a step forward, almost aggressively. It's just a clean break. I looked at it. Henderson ignored him and knelt by the stump. He frowned. He reached out and touched the wood. He leaned in close. David was standing behind him. I saw David's hand move to his pocket. He pulled out a heavy metal tape measure. He gripped it like a weapon. For a terrifying second, I thought he was going to strike the adjuster in the back of the head. Huh, Henderson said, standing up and brushing off his knees. Beavers. David lowered the tape measure. What? Beavers, Henderson said, snapping a photo. Nasty little buggers. Chewed right through the structural fibers. Unusual for a redwood, but not impossible. Does that affect the claim? David asked, his voice cracking. Not at all, Henderson said, making a check mark on his clipboard. Animal damage is covered under your comprehensive clause. Actually, it makes the claim easier. Act of God can be fought by the underwriters if the tree was rotten and you didn't maintain it. But beavers? That's sudden and accidental damage. You're in the clear. David let out a breath that was almost a sob. He laughed, a manic, high-pitched sound. Great! That's great news! He thought he was safe. The adjuster had seen the teeth marks and dismissed it as natural animal behavior. He hadn't seen the bait. He hadn't smelled the oil. He hadn't put it together. They walked back toward the driveway. I slipped into the passenger seat of the car just before they came into view. As we drove away from the house an hour later, David was practically giddy. He turned up the radio. He drummed his fingers on the steering wheel. It's done, Dad, he said, grinning at me. The check will be issued in a week. We'll bulldoze the wreckage, sell the lot to that developer I know, and you'll be set up in a nice facility by the end of the month." "A facility?" I asked. "Assisted living," he corrected. "The best. You'll love it. Bingo nights, nurses, no more lonely nights at the lake." He wasn't taking me to his house. He was dumping me in a home. He was going to take the insurance money, sell my land, and lock me away where no one would listen to my stories about poison trees. I touched the cold metal of the coffee can in my jacket pocket. "David," I said, staring out the window, "can we stop at the hardware store? I need to pick up a new flashlight. Mine was lost in the house." "Sure, Dad," he said magnanimously. "Anything you want." He pulled into the parking lot of the big box hardware store in town. "I'll wait here," he said, checking his texts. I got out of the car. I didn't go to the flashlight aisle. I went to the garden center. I found the aisle with the pest control. I found the exact bottle of beaver and rodent attractant that I had smelled on the tree. I took a picture of the UPC code. Then I went to the paint aisle. I found the section with solvents. I grabbed a small can of turpentine and a box of rags. I wasn't just building a case anymore. I was building a trap. I walked back to the car, hiding my purchases in the bag. "Got it?" David asked. "Got it," I said. "Good. Let's go home. I'm making steaks tonight to celebrate." "Celebrate what?" I asked. "A new beginning," he said. That night, after a dinner where I had to watch him toast to his own cleverness with a glass of expensive red wine, I went to my room. I waited until the house was silent. I took out the coffee can. The sweet potatoes were starting to ferment, the smell pungent and undeniable. I took out my phone. I had the search history. I had the physical evidence. I had the motive. But I needed a confession. The police might drag their feet. The insurance company might just deny the claim and not prosecute. I needed him to say it. I needed him to admit he did it. And I knew exactly how to make him do it. The next morning I walked into the kitchen while David was making coffee. I looked him dead in the eye. "David," I said, my voice clear and strong. No more shaking, no more stuttering. I remembered something. He looked up, surprised by the change in my tone. "What?" "The policy," I said. "The one you forged my signature on." His face went pale. "I didn't—" "Don't lie," I cut him off. "But that's not the problem. The problem is the rider clause. The one about criminal negligence." "What are you talking about?" He put the coffee pot down. "I called the insurance company this morning," I lied smoothly. "I told them about the Beavers. They said that if the Beavers were introduced or encouraged, it's fraud. A felony, 10 years in prison." David stared at me. You called them?" "And," I continued, leaning forward, "I told them I found a trail camera. One I set up last week to catch the teenagers who were stealing my firewood." David dropped the mug. It shattered on the floor, hot coffee splashing over his feet. He didn't even flinch. "A camera?" he whispered. "It was pointed right at the general," I said. "It survived the crash. It's in the safety deposit box at the bank. I'm going there today to retrieve the footage." I turned and walked toward the door. "I just thought you should know." I was bluffing. There was no camera. But David didn't know that. And now he had a choice: run or try to stop me before I got to the bank. I walked out the front door and got into my old pickup truck, which I had insisted on driving over from the lake house ruins the day before. I started the engine. I saw David running out of the house, his eyes wild. He jumped into his SUV. The chase was on, and I was leading him straight back to the scene of the crime. Please subscribe to the channel if you're enjoying the story. We have one part left, and you won't believe how this ends. Leave a comment. What would you do if you found out your own child tried to end your life for money? I watched in my rearview mirror as David's SUV swerved out of the driveway, kicking up a cloud of gravel. He was following me. He was close, his grill filling my mirror, aggressive and panicked. I wasn't driving to the bank, I was driving home. My old pickup truck rattled as I hit the highway, but the engine hummed with a reliability my son had never possessed. My hands were steady on the wheel. For the first time since the tree fell, I didn't feel like a victim. I felt like a father who had to do the hardest thing a father can ever do. I had to put my child down. Not literally, of course, but I had to destroy the life he had built, because he had tried to extinguish mine. The drive to the lake took 40 minutes. David stayed on my bumper the entire time. He was trying to intimidate me, honking his horn, flashing his high beams. He wanted me to pull over. He wanted to scream, to threaten, to force me to hand over the key to a safety deposit box that didn't exist. But I kept my eyes on the road. I knew exactly where I was going. I thought about the little boy I had raised. I remembered teaching him to ride a bike on this very road. I remembered the pride I felt when he graduated college. Where had that boy gone? Was he buried under the debt? Was he lost in the greed? Or had he never really been there at all? It broke my heart, a sharp physical pain in my chest that was worse than the shock of the tree falling. But I couldn't let the heartbreak stop me. If I let him get away with this, he wouldn't just take my house. He would take my dignity. He would put me in a home and let me rot while he spent my legacy on sports cars and bad investments. I turned onto the dirt road that led to the property. The trees closed in around us, creating a tunnel of green and brown. The sunlight flickered through the branches, strobing across the dashboard. I checked the mirror. David was still there, his face twisted in rage behind the windshield. I pulled up to the wreckage of the house. It looked like a scar on the landscape. The massive trunk of the general was still crushing the roof, a monument to his betrayal. I put the truck in park and turned off the engine. Silence rushed back in, heavy and thick. I stepped out of the truck. I didn't run. I stood by the open door, waiting. David's SUV skidded to a halt next to me. He threw his door open and marched toward me. He looked unhinged. His hair was wild, his shirt untucked. He looked like a man who was watching his future disintegrate. "Give me the key!" he screamed, not even bothering with a greeting. "Give me the key to the box, Dad, now!" "There is no key, David," I said calmly, leaning against the truck. He stopped, confused. "What? You said—" "I said a lot of things," I interrupted. "I said I was senile. I said I was confused. I said I believed it was an accident." He stared at me, his chest heaving. The realization started to dawn on him. The old man wasn't helpless. The old man was awake. "You're lying," he spat. "You're bluffing. You don't have a camera. You don't have anything." "I don't need a camera," I said. I reached into my heavy coat pocket and pulled out the coffee can. I shook it. The sound of the dirt and wood chips rattled inside. "I have this. Soil samples soaked in beaver attractant. Bark samples with the teeth marks. I have the receipts from the hardware store where you bought the bait. I have the photos of your search history. How to attract beavers to a specific tree. Remember that one?" David's face went chalk white. He took a step back, then a step forward. His hands curled into fists. You went through my computer?" "I did," I said. "And I know about the debts. I know about the loan sharks. I know you forged the power of attorney." "It was for us," he yelled, his voice cracking. "It was for the family. Do you have any idea how much this land is worth? Do you? And you're just sitting on it, letting it rot. I needed the money, Dad. I was going to lose everything." "So you decided to kill me?" I asked, my voice dropping to a whisper. "I didn't try to kill you," he insisted, though his eyes darted to the crushed porch where I had been sitting. I needed the house gone. The insurance money. It would have covered my debts, and then we could sell the land. You're old, Dad. You don't need this place. You're selfish, keeping all this equity locked up in dirt and trees while your son drowns. He was justifying it. In his twisted mind, he was the victim. I was the villain for living too long and holding on to my own property. I'm not dead yet, I said, and as long as I'm breathing, this is my home. David looked at the coffee can in my hand. He looked at the ruin of the house. He looked at me. I saw the decision form in his eyes. He was bigger than me, younger, desperate. He figured he could take the evidence. He figured he could scare me into silence. "Give me the can," he said, stepping closer. His voice was low, threatening. "No," I said. "Give it to me, or I swear to God, Dad, I will take it." "You already took my home," I said, gripping the can tighter. "You took my trust. You're not taking this." He lunged. He didn't punch me. He grabbed for the can. We grappled for a moment, an absurd, tragic wrestling match between a father and son in the dust of their destroyed history. He was strong, fueled by panic. He shoved me hard. I stumbled back, hitting my hip against the side of my truck. I cried out in pain. The can slipped from my hand and rolled onto the grass. David scrambled for it. He grabbed the can, his eyes wild with triumph. "You have no proof," he yelled, shaking the can at me. "I'll bury this. I'll burn it. You have nothing. Who are they going to believe? A crazy old man who thinks beavers are assassins, or his son." "They'll believe the sheriff," a deep voice boomed from the woods. David froze. He spun around. Walking out from behind the massive root ball of the fallen redwood was Sheriff Miller. Beside him was a deputy, his hand resting on his holster. And next to them, looking pale and sick, was Mr. Henderson, the insurance adjuster. David dropped the can. The lid popped off, spilling the damning mixture of sweet potatoes and scented soil onto the ground. "David," Sheriff Miller said, shaking his head, "I've known you since you were in diapers. I never thought I'd see the day." I, David stammered. He looked at me, then at the sheriff. "He's lying. He planted it. He's crazy." "I heard you, David," the sheriff said, walking closer. "We all heard you. I needed the money. You're selfish for living too long. We heard it all." "How?" David whispered. I pulled my phone from my pocket. It was on a call. "I called the station when I left your house," I said. "I told them I had evidence of a felony and that I was coming here to confront you. I told them I was afraid for my life. They told me to keep the line open." The sheriff nodded. "We got here 10 minutes ago. We parked down the logging road. Mr. Henderson was very interested to hear your theory about the beavers when Arthur called him too." Mr. Henderson stepped forward looking furious. "Insurance fraud is a serious crime, son. Attempted manslaughter is another. But forging a power of attorney to facilitate it? You're looking at federal charges." David looked at the ground. The fight drained out of him instantly. He slumped, his shoulders collapsing. He looked small. He looked like a child who had broken a vase and knew there was no way to hide the pieces. "Dad," he whimpered, looking at me with tears in his eyes. "Dad, please, don't let them take me. I'm your son." I looked at him. I looked at the man who had fed beavers to drop a 200-ton tree on my head. I looked at the man who had planned to lock me away in a facility so he could spend my money. "You are my son," I said, my voice trembling. "And that is why I have to do this. Because somewhere along the way, I failed to teach you right from wrong. I won't fail you again by letting you escape the consequences." The deputy stepped forward and pulled David's hands behind his back. The click of the handcuffs was the loudest sound in the forest. David began to sob, a jagged, ugly sound. He didn't look at me as they walked him to the patrol car. He just stared at his feet. I stood there by my truck until the police cars disappeared down the driveway. Mr. Henderson stayed behind for a moment. "I'm sorry, Arthur," he said gently, "about the house, and everything else." "Will the policy cover it?" I asked, looking at the wreckage. "The beaver clause is valid," Henderson said with a grim smile. And since the damage was caused by a third party with malicious intent, even if that party is a relative, you're covered. We'll rebuild, and we'll go after his assets for the deductible. Thank you, I said. He drove away, leaving me alone in the silence. I walked over to the stump of the general. I touched the rough bark. The tree was gone. My house was gone. My family, for all intents and purposes, was gone. I sat down on the tailgate of my truck and looked out at the lake. The sun was setting now, casting long shadows across the water. It was the same view I had loved for 40 years. It was still beautiful. David went to prison. The list of charges was long: insurance fraud, attempted grand larceny, elder abuse, forgery. Brenda, his wife, divorced him 6 months into his sentence. It turned out she knew nothing about the scheme. She had been just as deceived by his financial lies as I was. She brings the grandkids to visit me sometimes. We fish off the dock. We don't talk about their father. I rebuilt the house. It's smaller now. A nice cabin, sturdy and warm. I used the insurance money, and I sold the timber from the general to a local artisan who makes furniture. I have a coffee table in my living room made from the heartwood of that tree. It's a reminder. Sometimes people tell me I should have been lenient. They say blood is thicker than water. But I know the truth. Blood can turn toxic, and when it does, you have to cut it out to save the body. I still sit on my porch every morning with my coffee. I watch the sun come up. I listen to the birds. And I watch the beavers swimming in the distance. I don't chase them away anymore. They were just doing what was in their nature. They were building a home. David was the only one who destroyed one. Thank you for listening to my story. It wasn't easy to tell, but the truth matters. If you enjoyed this narration, please hit that like button and subscribe. It really helps the channel. And let me know in the comments. Can you ever forgive a family member who betrays you for money, or are some bridges meant to be burned? Until next time.
My grandpa's worst really happened. I believe him. If you want more true tales like this, hit subscribe.